Hot on the heels of our MAVIC Air 2 versus MAVIC Mini comparison video, you guys virtually demanded in the comments that we make a MAVIC Air 2 versus MAVIC 2 Pro comparison video. Let me simplify this for you. Best camera, MAVIC 2 Pro. Best value, MAVIC Air 2. So it's up to you, depending on your needs, your wants, and your budget, whether it's worth paying up for that better quality camera in the MAVIC 2 Pro. Let's get into this with some facts and figures, and you can come to your own conclusions. Stewart here from Drone Film Guide, the channel where we learn to fly like filmmakers. If you consult our MAVIC purchasing guide, then at first glance it's difficult to differentiate between the MAVIC Air 2 and the MAVIC 2 Pro. They both have excellent flight time, they both have OcuSync 2.0 transmission systems, they both have tons of intelligent flight modes, they both take raw photographs, so on and so on. And this has led many to ask the question, is the MAVIC 2 Pro worth twice the price of the MAVIC Air 2? Well, it all comes down to this camera. This is the main difference. This 1-inch sensor camera that sits on the MAVIC 2 Pro versus the 1/2-inch sensor camera that sits on the MAVIC Air 2. I'm going to show you in a second why the video performance, at least of the MAVIC 2 Pro, is far superior to that of the MAVIC Air 2. It's then up to you to decide what value you place on that. So, what are the differences here? First up, we have 10-bit color depth here on the MAVIC 2 Pro versus your standard, more typical 8-bit color depth. We'll show you in a second why that is so valuable. We have a 1-inch sensor versus a 1/2-inch sensor. Nice big sensor, more capture of light, better performance in low light, and a less grainy, less noisy image. I'll show you proof of that in a second too. Added to that, we have a capacity to go above ISO 100. Now, when you shoot the ISO up, normally on small sensor cameras, the image becomes incredibly noisy and quite unusable. Not so on the MAVIC 2 Pro. On the MAVIC Air 2, I was surprised. Probably the first small sensor camera I've seen where you could put the ISO up a little bit and not completely destroy the image. So an impressive performance here too. On the MAVIC 2 Pro, we have essentially two usable focal lengths. The standard wide angle of 28mm, and then we have the so-called high quality field of view, which is where it punches in and takes a 4K crop from the middle of the sensor. That equates to roughly a 40mm equivalent field of view. Very, very useful and opens up lots of creative opportunities. It's like having a little zoom prime on that drone. Very, very good. With the MAVIC Air 2, we just have the standard 24mm wide field of view. We also have a variable aperture on the MAVIC 2 Pro. Very useful if you're using ND filters, which we do. You can put on your ND16, for example, set the aperture to 5.6, and if the lighting conditions change, then just move the aperture up and down while you're in the air. The MAVIC 2 Pro does have one drawback, however, in that the processing power required for that 10-bit image means that there's some barrel distortion on the image, and in some cases that can be quite annoying if you have straight lines, and it's an extra process that you have to go through in post-production to de-fisheye that image. No such problem with the MAVIC Air 2. We also have to remember to focus the MAVIC 2 Pro every time we press record, otherwise there's a risk of having some mushy footage. No such problem with the MAVIC Air 2 because it is a fixed focus system. We also have 4K at 60 frames per second on the MAVIC Air 2. We only go up to 30 frames per second on the MAVIC 2 Pro. So the MAVIC Air 2 has got a lot going for it. It really, really does. So this entire debate comes down to how good is that 10-bit D-Log-M color profile on the MAVIC 2 Pro. Check out the shot taken with the MAVIC Air 2. Looks absolutely lovely. Let's switch to the shot taken with the MAVIC 2 Pro. Similarly, it looks absolutely fantastic, although you can see some of that barrel distortion there along the horizon. Let's zoom in 4 times and talk about sharpness. Look at how the MAVIC 2 Pro picture is noticeably softer. If you look at the flag around the trees, it's really quite obvious. If we zoom in 8 times, it's even more apparent. Contrary to what you might think, the professional filmmaker will in all likelihood prefer the softer image from the MAVIC 2 Pro. You can always add sharpness in post. It's a cleaner read that we're getting off the sensor. By contrast, the image from the MAVIC Air 2 has digital sharpening applied, and it's very difficult to extract that in post. Moreover, in the DJI Fly app that controls the MAVIC Air 2, we don't have the option of adjusting our colour profiles, so we can't reduce the sharpness at the time of capture. The other noticeable factor in the image here is sensor noise. Even in this perfectly illuminated scenario, with the ISO at 100, there's a lot of sensor noise on the MAVIC Air 2 image compared with that of the MAVIC 2 Pro. If you look at this image of the sky, both cameras do a really great job. The shots look amazing and they both deal with that blown out sun pretty much identically. So in terms of handling extreme contrast, the MAVIC Air 2 matches the MAVIC 2 Pro. The dynamic range there is very impressive. If we zoom in 8 times, again we see the softer image of the MAVIC 2 Pro and the noisier image of the MAVIC Air 2. Keep in mind as well that noise is much more apparent in an image's shadows, so let's check an example of that. Bob Marley looking great in both images. Zoom in 8 times again and look at the amount of noise in the shadows. There's a clear difference between the MAVIC Air 2 and the MAVIC 2 Pro. Those 3 examples you saw were straight off the camera, no colour correction, no colour grading. Now, something that we've done since the beginning of time with video cameras is protect our highlights in an image. It's so important, if possible, to not have big ugly blown out sections in your sky or in a window. Even if you're doing ground footage, the principle is the same. With a high quality camera, you can underexpose an image knowing that you can recover those shadows and highlights in post. Classic scenario here is a sunset. We've exposed for the sky, but it's left our ground quite underexposed. Zoom in 8 times and you guessed it, tons of noise in the MAVIC Air 2's shadows. Let's take the MAVIC 2 Pro shot and apply a really heavy colour correction and grade to increase the exposure in the bottom half of the image. Big transformation, and hopefully you're starting to get a sense of just how good the picture of the MAVIC 2 Pro is. Now let's apply the same grade to the MAVIC Air 2. Here I actually got a real surprise. I just copied and pasted exactly the same corrections I made and I was fully expecting it to completely ruin the MAVIC Air 2 shot. It really didn't. It's done a really great job of handling that colour correction. All that being said, the grain in the shadows of the MAVIC Air 2 image is far more pronounced now, and we see a much better performance from the 10-bit MAVIC 2 Pro. We've done 10-bit versus 8-bit tests before in this channel, so none of this comes as a surprise to me. It's just the nature of small sensor cameras with an 8-bit picture profile. That being said, what has come as a surprise to me is just how well this picture handles colour correction. If you look at the ISO test that we did for the MAVIC Air 2, you'll see at 100 ISO there's tons of noise in the shadows, as we've seen comprehensively already. But as the ISO goes up, the picture doesn't really change much. Now, in the past, by the time you get to 400 or 800, the image is completely unusable, completely ruined with a small sensor drone like the original MAVIC Pro, for example. This for me is a tremendous improvement in the picture quality of this MAVIC Air 2 and might in part explain why it's handling that extreme colour correction that we did previously. Just for comparison, if you look at the ISO test for the MAVIC 2 Pro, you can see at 100 we have that nice kind of smooth image, and as we go up the image starts to deteriorate. Now on both these drones you definitely want to keep the ISO as low as possible. I'd recommend certainly an ISO of 100 or 200 on the MAVIC Air 2, but I'd say you can go up to 800 or so fairly safely on the MAVIC 2 Pro. If we talk about photography performance, the difference is far less pronounced because they both take raw photographs. We don't have that 8-bit versus 10-bit disparity that we have in video mode. If we zoom in really close on a 12 megapixel standard photo from the MAVIC Air 2 and a 20 megapixel photo from the MAVIC 2 Pro, then predictably we have more resolution, so we see a little bit more detail in the MAVIC 2 Pro picture. However, the MAVIC Air 2 also has a 48 megapixel mode which does take raw photos. Zoom in really close and we see a little bit more detail in the MAVIC Air 2 image. In the tests I did, the sensor noise looks comparable across the two cameras, although I would expect in certain situations a better performance from the 1-inch sensor MAVIC 2 Pro. So I'm going to call this one a draw because I think they are both exceptional in terms of their photography performance. You've seen the evidence, let me know what you think. In my opinion and my experience of editing MAVIC 2 Pro footage, the picture quality is far superior and we really do benefit from that 10-bit. But I do find the barrel distortion quite annoying, if I'm honest. Also, the MAVIC 2 Pro doesn't have a good quality 8-bit picture profile. We're stuck with normal mode, which is contrasty and saturated. There's no D-Cinelike that we can use in here in 8-bit. Because the MAVIC Air 2 is so good, I think it is quite tough to justify paying double for the MAVIC 2 Pro, if I'm honest. Added to that, DJI have set an expectation of a steady flow of new products every single year, so we have a reasonable expectation that there will be a MAVIC 3 at some point. This MAVIC 2 Pro came out in August 2018. Do you want to hold off and see what kind of beast they produce with the MAVIC 3? I'm certainly curious to see. That being said, it's not going to be cheap, is it? It will be about $1,500 as well. So in terms of your budget, only you know how much money you have. Anyway, as I say, leave your comments below. Love to hear from you, and we will see you next time.